The city of Palmyra is once again under the control of the Syrian Army. President Bashar al-Assad's troops, backed by Russian airstrikes, have recaptured the city from ISIS after just a few days of intense fighting. Although gunfire could still be heard in the eastern part of the city on Sunday morning, but they did say that the bulk of ISIL's forces had already retreated. So I think that's key here. Around 400 ISIS fighters were killed in this siege. It's a very large number. We haven't seen numbers like that in a very long time. Some of the first journalists who entered the city since ISIS fled described it as a ghost town, saying that the thousands of people who once lived there have all basically left. Either died or left, basically. It's extremely sad. Palmyra's ancient ruins, which basically is why this city is so well known and why the media really focused on this one town. Actually, some good news coming there. Other archaeologists who've come in have basically said it's not as bad as we thought it was. For example, the amphitheater still there, for example. So, these archways, these columns, these amphitheaters too, they're a very unique mixture of Roman, Greek, Persian architecture as well. And it's so sad that in the beginning we saw, ISIS kind of making these propaganda videos, going out, making videos specifically showing the destruction of these temples. That in itself was so sad, but a lot of these archaeologists are saying, well, it could have been way worse. The extent, though, of the looting that went on is still unknown. ISIS is also known to booby trap cities or towns that they will flee from, so it's still unknown if, any of these are still detonated to explode. So archaeologists are very hesitant to move in and do really comprehensive research on what is still there and what isn't, but from the looks of it, it's looking better than people would have expected. Again, the extent of how many people are dead left behind, though, is still going to have to be seen as well.
Well, I mean, with their expectations, I can only assume that their expectations must have been pretty low to begin with. Yeah. So the fact that, things are better than that they had expected, well, that comes as some relief. It's a pretty disturbing element of this kind of insurgency, and we saw it with when the Taliban, took over in Afghanistan, where one of the first things that they did was they decided to basically have a weapons practice, target practice using the Buddhas of Bamyan. So these were these enormous statues in Afghanistan, oldest surviving statues of the Buddha, and they just really destroyed them with rocket launchers. They just kind of went to work on them right away, basically to create like a year zero. We're going to erase the history that was here before. It is no longer relevant, and we saw that ISIS basically did the same thing by taking, drills to their own cultural legacy. So it's something that, particularly for citizens of the world, this is basically an attack on all citizens of the world. This is all of our human patrimony that is coming under assault. The fact that things aren't quite as bad as they had anticipated is a minor victory, I guess. I don't know if we could really call it a victory.
Right, and if anything, for Assad himself, the president of Syria, I think this can be seen as very symbolic. I mean, he drove ISIS away from this city that the whole world was basically looking at, right? So that's kind of just going to be like this, well, hey, look what we're doing against the terrorists, look how great I am. President Putin also called him to congratulate him, and he also made a separate statement saying this would have been impossible without the help of the Russian airstrikes that we provided for them. So again, I think on that side of things, the US is usually on the other side, and it's usually us versus them. I think for them, this is like a very good symbolic victory, because a lot of people now are talking about how ISIS is quickly losing ground, right? And how much the Russians have helped so far, not to mention the US coalition on the other side too. So I mean, I think this is a huge victory, maybe not in numbers, we're talking about 400 ISIS militants dead, but definitely symbolically, this was a huge victory for the Syrian government. But at the same time, now what, right? What happens when we drive ISIS out all the way? We're back at square one where we were 5 years ago, before this whole power vacuum started and ISIS was able to come in. We saw, where did it all come from? It started from protests, right? People unhappy from the civil war. So unfortunately, you drive out ISIS, great, well, everyone's happy, right? We're saying, oh, the threat of ISIS is over. No, it's not, right? We still have a very loose network of jihadis all around the world, in Europe, probably here in the US, throughout the Middle East, who are ready to carry out attacks anytime. But then for the Syrian people as well, now they're back where they were in square one with the same government, right, before the civil war started, and now you just have millions of people displaced, hundreds of thousands dead, cities literally leveled to the ground. Yeah, so how can you call this a victory? It's a good step in the right direction, but victory?
It's a step, but it's kind of like, there's still kind of they have to go behind the dark side of the moon, and then before we can actually come back to any semblance of like a reality that is tenable for the people of Syria. We see images of Raqqa, and the city looks just...
the drone footage that went around the city?
It's abysmal.
Oh, man, that was terrible.
It's terrible. It looks like Dresden after, in 1945. So it's a baby step towards the right direction, but man, that thing has still got to scab over and then heal, and that's going to take decades.
Right, that's for sure. Well, here we see Palmyra getting back in the hands of the Syrian forces, but like Jason just alluded to, it'll be a very, very long time before we see any change for good in Syria for the long term.